So I've not really done a movie review before, straight up, like right after seeing it in the theater, but I just got back from seeing Spider-Man No Way Home, and I think I gotta talk about it. So a little background with me and Spider-Man. I really enjoyed the first Raimi film. I think Spider-Man 2, like most people, is probably one of the best superhero movies ever made. And then Spider-Man 3 is, I mean, it's good for the memes. It's nowhere near as good as the first two, but it's definitely better than what comes next. Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, I think, are both pretty bad, to be honest. I think Andrew Garfield played a good Spider-Man, but he just got shafted with the scripts. And then I know, like, the hardcore Spidey fans have qualms with Tom Holland Spider-Man because he's too much like, basically, Iron Boy. I don't have a long history with the comics like a lot of people do, so just as a movie watcher, I really enjoy his performance as Spider-Man. So I've enjoyed basically every appearance he's had going back all the way to Civil War up until now. This is his sixth appearance, I believe. Now, from the outset, I've been cautiously optimistic about this movie because I think Phase 4 so far has been pretty abysmal. The TV shows have either been not interesting or just contradictory to previously established lore, and some of the characters have been kind of ruined. And to be honest, overall, I've just kind of lost interest in the Marvel movies after Endgame because I feel like we had our 10-year-long story arc and it's come to a close, so now it just feels like this is just bonus stuff. So my interest was waning, but I'm like, you know what? I like Spider-Man, so I'm probably going to give this one a shot. And after the trailers, with like seeing some of the old Raimi verse characters coming back, I'm like, okay, you got me. It was nostalgia bait and it worked on me. But my biggest concern was that it was going to end up being like Spider-Man 3 and that you have way too many villains and you can't juggle them all. Trying to spin that many plates and still have a coherent story, I thought would be a pretty difficult task. But I'm pleased to say that I think they did a really good job with this movie. I was kind of expecting a fun mess. Like it was just going to be bonkers nonsense, but I was going to have fun because as we assumed, and by the way, spoilers in this. Going to go full spoiler heavy. There's been endless rumors for over a year at this point, maybe even 2 years, that Toby and Andrew were going to be in this, and I think we all expected it, and yes, they are, and it's just as great as we all had hoped. And my biggest surprise was how much they were in it. I was kind of expecting maybe 10, 15 minutes at most, but I feel like they had at least half an hour, maybe even 40 minutes. Or maybe it wasn't that long, and I just kind of, because the movie, there's so much in this movie, it's just packed to the gills. It's the second longest Marvel movie after Endgame, which is kind of nuts. But there's just so much to process that maybe they were only in it for 30 minutes and it felt like longer. I don't know. And it was paced really well. Like the 2.5 hours just flew by. But after that first trailer with Doc-Ock, I was like, okay, and I was a little bit scared. I was like, please don't ruin their arcs from those movies because they were very good. But surprisingly, they actually found a way to tie up loose ends from all the previous iterations of the Spider-Man films and also kind of put a little bow on a lot of the characters' arcs. One of my favorite scenes in this movie is when Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man reunites with Doc-Ock after Doc-Ock has been basically turned back from being evil and he's just regular Dr. Octavius again. Because they never got to have that reunion. Doc-Ock died in the river. So seeing their reunion was really cool. They made Electro a much more, like, I guess, interesting. I mean, he's not in it much. Him and Sandman and the Lizard don't have as much to do as Doc-Ock and Green Goblin. But for what he did have, I think Electro was done much better than he was in that abysmal version of him in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And the Lizard, I mean, is there really anything to say about him? He's kind of just here. I'm surprised they even got Rhys Ifans to come back to play him again. I was pleasantly surprised that they got, I think, everybody back. Even Thomas Hayden Church was Sandman, although I'm not sure if he actually was there on set because it looks like, because he was basically made of sand the whole time. So I think they could have just CG'd him. And there was one scene where you actually see him as Flint Marko, and it looked like a really young version of Thomas Hayden Church. And I believe that was just Spider-Man 3 footage they reused and changed a bit. And maybe he just came in to do the voice work. I don't know. But Green Goblin, I think, had like a great part in this. Willem Dafoe kills it as usual. And it was, like I said, I was originally scared. I'm like, is this going to mess up the arcs and like the original Raimi films? But I don't think they do. He like smashes his helmet in this and he just goes with the hood, which is way more comic looking. And Willem's already got that like big crooked nose, so he kind of looks goblinish, especially now that he's getting older. He looks very goblin-esque. And speaking of getting older, I am amazed by how good Alfred Molina looks. Because like Alfred Molina in 2004, in Spider-Man. It's been so long since that movie, and he doesn't look that much different in this. I don't know if they did any de-aging CG or anything, but I guess bravo for aging gracefully. But I have never heard a theater's energy be this electric. Everybody was just on cloud nine, just high on the nostalgia fumes. Yeah, maybe the movie can have a little bit too many member berries, but I think these days a little fan service is what we all want. But it was fan service done well. It doesn't get in the way of the story. And one of the best things about this movie is that having all these returning villains does not take away from the core story of Peter Parker. And I think, honestly, this might be the best, just straight up Peter Parker story we've had from this trilogy with Tom Holland and of the MCU as a whole. Because he loses a lot in this. He loses Aunt May. It was kind of a cool reversal to have her give the responsibility speech instead of Uncle Ben. But then the big thing he loses is he chooses at the end to have everybody forget who he is. So that's like his arc throughout the movie as he starts out wanting everyone to forget, and then by the end he chooses that. So I'm glad to see all the jangling keys and stuff that everybody was distracted by did not get in the way of the story. So bravo for these writers. And man, it was such a trip and such an amazing, like, once in a lifetime experience to see scenes with all three Spider-Men. Like, I feel like the energy in that room was just as hype as it was when Endgame came out. Because, I mean, people have described this as like the Endgame for Spider-Man movies, and yeah, it kind of is. It now kind of brings the other, like, all previous 7 Spider-Man movies into canon. I know, obviously, the Holland ones already were, but it sort of brings the Mark Webb and the Sam Raimi ones into canon now, kind of. I really loved seeing Tobey. I mean, that got a lot of cheers in the theater. But to be honest, he seems a little rusty because he hasn't really acted that much since Spider-Man 3. He's done very little. But from what he did have, I think he did an admirable job. And just hearing him talk about like what his life is now, it sounds like he has a family with MJ, probably has kids. This is the closest we're probably going to get to a Spider-Man 4 with him. So, and I imagine because Sam Raimi is directing the next Doctor Strange, so I wonder if he was on set at all, helping out with like his versions of the characters that he created for this movie. And then you hear what Andrew Garfield's up to in his life, in his universe. And I think all of us expected when Zendaya falls that he was going to be the one to catch her because he gets to rectify that mistake he made. Like, they just do such a good job of basically capping off all 3 versions of Spider-Man in such a satisfying way. Like seeing redeemed Doc-Ock meeting Tobey Spider-Man again. Having Andrew Garfield basically get I kind of like, it's a little bit meta with his role because he kind of in the role, like in the movie, kind of acknowledges that he's the least popular one because he's like, at the end of the movie they have to call each other like Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 or Peter 1, 2, and 3. And he's like, yeah, I'll be Peter 3. Like, he kind of embraces the fact that he's the least popular one. He was handed a rough deck for his movies. But he kind of gets to tie up the loose ends with that, with him saving Zendaya because it's like him getting to fix a mistake of his movies. It kind of makes those movies better now when you add this stuff into it. And like I said with the other characters, Lizard is just kind of there. Sandman is just kind of there. They don't really have much to do. But I think what they did with Doc-Ock and Green Goblin were just basically perfect. And Electro. They do reference Rhino, and part of me kind of wanted just for the lulz to see a scene with Paul Giamatti's Rhino. That would have made me laugh. But obviously the best parts of the movie are all the banter between the 3 Spider-Men. Like when they first come in through the portals, and when Tobey and Andrew are fighting, that's a great scene. And then like one of my favorite scenes is them on the scaffolding, all just discussing, just having this back and forth. And then also the scene where they're talking about the web shooters, how they're like, how is yours natural? And then they're talking to, he hits back at Andrew and Tom, and he's like, well, yours aren't natural. And like, there's just a whole back and forth, and it's just so good. One of my biggest fears also was alleviated because the trailers made Doctor Strange look kind of like an idiot. The way that trailer was edited made it seem like Doctor Strange screwed up the spell because Peter was interrupting him, and I was like, come on, that wouldn't happen. Doctor Strange isn't that dumb. Thankfully, that's just the trailer and how it was edited because it's dealt with much better in the movie. The movie's not perfect, though. There are things that don't make much sense. Like, I don't know why suddenly Ned can use the sling ring. Like, when it took Doctor Strange a long time to nail that. That's very strange. Also, the fight between Peter and Doctor Strange, I think, ended oddly. I feel like Doctor Strange could have just, like, thrown him into some... he's crazy powerful. He could just probably trap Peter in like a cube or something. I don't know why he lost that fight to Peter. Felt like the plot needed that to happen. There is some of that MCU humor that gets in the way sometime of certain scenes. Like there's poignant scenes that you want them to like sit there and last a little bit longer, and then they just immediately undercut it with a joke, and it's like, I wish you would have let that scene sit more. It's an ongoing problem with some MCU movies. And I I knew this would happen. I knew there'd be some reference to memes, but I could not believe that they had the line from Willem Dafoe where he says, I'm something of a scientist myself. That got a lot of chuckles in the audience. I love the fact that they've embraced those memes. And the other one that I feel like less people really caught was the whole my back thing. Toby's back is hurting, and it's a reference to Spider-Man, was it 2, I think? Where he hurts his back, and there was that whole, oh, my back scene. And that's referencing the fact that I believe Toby got in like some kind of accident and hurt his back and almost didn't come back to play the role again because of it. So there was a little reference to that, and then you have the great scene of Andrew cracking his back. Just amazing stuff. Like, there's stuff in this movie I never thought we would have seen, ever. Like, I never thought we'd see Willem Dafoe again, or Alfred Molina, or any of those characters, and let alone all three actors. Like, that's why this is like a once-in-a-generation thing that can happen. If only that could happen with Batman. Like, if they could somehow make a story work with Batman, with, like, Flashpoint or something, where you could have... Well, they're kind of doing that with the Flash movie, because Ben Affleck is going to be in it, alongside Michael Keaton. But could you imagine a movie with Ben Affleck, Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, Christian Bale, Robert Pattinson, and unfortunately we can't have Adam West in it, but that would also be cool. But just something like this has never been done in live action. It just feels, like I said, the energy in that room was incredible. And I want to go see it again as soon as possible, just to feel that energy again. And then how it all wraps up, I'm not really going that thorough into this. This is just kind of a quick review because I've never really done a review on this channel before for a movie, so I'm just kind of trying it out and getting my thoughts out there. But the way it wraps up is a little bit melancholy, but I think it works for the character, and I think it also addresses a lot of the issues people have had with the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. Because everyone has complained that, he relies way too much on Stark Tech, and they're like, Spider-Man is supposed to have nothing, start from nothing, live in a dingy apartment, make his own suit, have nobody to rely on except himself. And he's in that position by the end of this movie. So he loses Aunt May, and then the spell is done where literally everybody forgets who he is. So he's completely alone. He's back to square one, except now he doesn't have Ned or MJ. So he's completely alone now. And that's kind of the point where people wanted him to be back when Homecoming came out. But they couldn't do it that way because he was introduced in Civil War. So this whole trilogy of him and like his appearances in the Avengers films has been kind of like becoming, it's like a Batman Begins for Spider-Man, where like now he is finally Spider-Man, and whatever the future holds, it's going to be like the definitive Spider-Man. Even though I've enjoyed these movies, even though hardcore fans have been like, it's not actually Spider-Man, he's Spider-Boy or Iron Boy. So he has no more connection to the Avengers, and I also feel like it's a good way to... This is kind of him finally severing all links to the Avengers and the MCU. Like, he can now kind of go off and do whatever Sony wants to do. Even though I think Disney's still going to be involved with the future Spider-Man films. But he no longer has to interact with, like, Nick Fury or Tony Stark or Happy. And speaking of Happy, that last scene I really liked, where Peter's at Aunt May's grave, and Happy doesn't know him. And he's like, oh, how did you know her? And yeah, it's just such a great scene. It doesn't have a happy ending at all, really, but I think it works for the character. And it sets him up really well for the future. But yeah, those are just my initial thoughts for Spider-Man No Way Home. I had an absolute blast watching this. And I'm sure I've left things out and forgotten things. I'm sure there's some little plot problems that I haven't mentioned that I'm sure will be brought to my attention at some point. First impressions is I have not had this much fun watching a movie in I don't know how long. I don't think I've ever had such a big cheesy grin on my face when watching a movie. Just for as soon as Toby and Andrew show up, I'm just grinning from ear to ear for like the rest of the film. And people clapped several times and cheered. They clapped at the end. Oh, and speaking of the end, I actually should mention the 2 end credit scene. Well, one of them was basically a full-on trailer for Doctor Strange 2, which I thought was interesting. That I feel like they haven't had a full-on trailer for the end credits since, Thor? Yeah, Thor had like a trailer for Avengers at the end. Maybe they've done it since, but I don't remember one. And then the other one is I've seen Venom 1. I thought it was honestly pretty bad. I've not seen Venom 2, but I'm interested in how they pulled this off, this scene, because I thought they were insinuating that Tom Hardy's Venom was going to be in the MCU, but no, it seems like it's the total opposite, which I'm okay with because I've heard he's really goofy, and I honestly don't know why they went that direction with Venom, but they did. So he gets blipped back to his own universe, and he leaves behind a little bit of the symbiote, which is a good way to have the symbiote now move forward and be used for future MCU movies, because I was really not looking forward to them shoehorning that version of Eddie Brock into this universe because I thought it would suck. I'm sure that was a big fight behind the scenes of whether or not they want to do that. So going forward, I think they need to keep the same writers, keep the same writing team, because you guys have done a great job with this Spider-Man. Don't discard them, get them to continue. That's the most important part, because we don't want to end up with Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 again, but with Tom Holland. But yeah, that's really about it for my thoughts on this movie. Like I said, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to do a much more in-depth review on this. It's just something I wanted to talk about because I just walked out of the theater. I highly, 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 highly recommend you see it. Oh, actually, and also, how could I forget? Charlie Cox is in it. Like, that got a round of applause too from people. I mean, from the people that know the show. And I freaking love Daredevil on Netflix. So, and that was the big rumor. There was like a supposed leak screenshot. Turns out it was real, because his little scene, I was a little bit of a little afraid of them maybe screwing up his character, but no, he just had a small scene, and I think they nailed it. And that actually makes me really happy, because that canonizes the show. That means the show happened in canon. So, good job, Charlie Cox and crew. I know one thing's for sure: this movie is going to make an insane amount of money, because I want to see it again. I think it's gonna have a lot of repeat viewership. I need to find someone as soon as possible to go see it with me that hasn't seen it yet. So let me know in the comments what you thought about the movie. Is it your favorite Spider-Man movie? I think there could be an argument made that it's one of the best. This movie could be argued to be in like the top 10 MCU movies. Honestly, I don't. Maybe top 5. I don't know. It's definitely top 10. Because even if you strip away all the member berries, all the nostalgia bait, at its core is still a good story. And that was what I feared that we wouldn't get with this movie. I thought it was going to be a giant incoherent mess with a bunch of callbacks, but thankfully it's not. So go see it. Tell me what you thought about it in the comments. And I'm on the road to 100 subscribers, and recently I've been reminding people to subscribe, and it seems to be working. I'm growing little by little, so if you like what I do here, press the red button to subscribe. And maybe I'll get in the habit and make more movie reviews now. Who knows? And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you for watching.